Hey, buddy. Welcome to another episode of How AI is Built. Today, we come in with a special changelog where we will keep up to date with our preferred data and AI tools. Today, Supabase new storage engine OrioleDB with Christopher Gwilliams. Why should you care? Think reduced database bloat, super fast updates, more efficient concurrency, data compression, and more.
The option of having this choice of storage engines was kind of the main driver of OrioleDB, and it does this with a change that came in Postgres 12. I think originally it was called pluggable storage, but now it's table access methods. So it's kind of like an API to interact with data within tables and maybe modify how that gets stored.
And what do you exactly mean with an API to interact with tables? And what does this actually enable in like new use cases?
So yeah, new use cases. I think it's a change. I guess that's. I think maybe it came from like looking at particular workloads and seeing how the way Postgres currently does things can be suboptimal for those kind of workloads. Maybe when you have like a crazy high transaction throughput or something like this, especially because there are resources used on your database instance then that are doing things that potentially don't need to be done with modern hardware. And that's kind of the bigger change, I guess, is then OrioleDB focusing more on this idea of an undo log. Essentially, this is the idea that each operation, that the row itself is updated immediately. So the database gets that change, it writes the new data. It doesn't kind of wait like with the write-ahead log, kind of keeping versions around. But it does keep it in the undo log. The idea is the undo log is a lot shorter in terms of like time to live than Postgres currently deals with things. So essentially, as soon as any transaction that was dealing with that row is killed, then the undo log will also then kind of cut itself off. So it's being cycled a lot quicker than write ahead logs currently are.
Yeah. And how does it actually work below the hood, like in an abstract way, but also like in a little bit more detailed way?
In an abstract way, I guess you could sort of see it as similar to how MySQL handles things, that they have this InnoDB and multiple different storage engine options. In a slightly less abstract way, if you've ever worked with extensions like Timescale or Hydra or something else, then you've seen these options like create a table, like with the using clause, where you say like using Timescale or using Citus or something like this. That's essentially how Oriole is designed to work then. The under the hood part, I guess, is maybe more detailed. That probably goes back to your question on the how does the API work. So Postgres 12 introduced this, I guess, exposed this functionality of table access methods, and that was not something available, I guess, to the system, I guess, to kind of Postgres extensions or whatever else before. But then what that does do is allows you then to interact with tables like at the structural level, let's say. So operations then being performed on the table can then be modified by extensions. Oriole changes it pretty heavily, I guess, and that's also why it's not just an extension that you can kind of just turn on. I don't know how many patches. I think there's maybe like 20 patches or something that have already gone into Postgres 16 currently, and there's that number again to go into 17. It's quite a big change for Postgres. Obviously, we're hoping that does come, but it basically changes how the tables are stored on the disk. Changes it pretty heavily. First is what we've talked about, the undo log, then focusing on that more. Because of that, it also changes the need for automated features that Postgres does. So if you currently have a Postgres database, you can use pgstat statements and some other like diagnostic queries to see how big your tables currently are, how much of that Postgres considers to be like bloat, so like space that it's built up but it hasn't yet cleared. Maybe that you just deleted like thousands of rows, but the table's still being actively used. So it keeps those around on disk, and it maybe considers that to be bloat. It's waiting to clear it up. And you can see then when did auto vacuum run last, when would it run again, and those kind of things. Oriole doesn't need that so much. What it does instead is it makes those changes immediately. And that comes with the benefit of we don't use spinning disks anymore. Like these operations are done a lot faster. So these operations can also be more short-lived within the database as well. So it makes the change immediately, stores those changes in the undo log, and then waits for every transaction that was accessing that row to be finished, and then it can just cut it from the undo log. If it stays for longer than anticipated, the undo log can also start pushing those things into the disk as well. So it's not just storing everything in memory for like super active databases.
Yeah. And what I like, especially on the developer side who are already on Supabase, which developers and which performance characteristics of projects should particularly look at OrioleDB as a solution?
In its current form, then I think like high throughput databases, those are the ones that will notice the benefit most quickly. Even more specifically, high throughput databases where the data is also being replicated, and that could be replicated just to read replicas because they want to offload some of the read traffic, or being replicated maybe externally to like a data warehouse or something else. Oriole helps with the high throughput part, but also because of the reduction of disk space needed, I guess those also help. Like those operations, then if you have replication happening and replica lag builds up, then that becomes a larger issue as well. And you obviously configure Postgres to clear that disk, clear that space, but you still want to make sure that your replicas stay in sync.
Do you think there are a group of entirely new use cases that will be possible now on Supabase and in Postgres through the adoption of OrioleDB?
Yeah. Hopefully similar to what MySQL currently has, to be able to switch out these storage engines. I mean, already Postgres sort of had this, that you could have kind of your relational workload within the database, but you could also then be storing your time series data using something like Timescale or Citus or something else. But essentially, this kind of modifies it then even further, that Oriole could then be backed by something like S3, right? So that you could have tables on a completely different storage medium as well. But that's also kind of pending those changes. Hopefully, those changes going upstream as well into Postgres.
Yes, and this is especially like a pretty interesting use case for me. So I, for example, also have a Postgres database deployed where on a monthly basis, I'm basically taking all data out which isn't that necessary anymore and just putting it into a Delta Lake, which seems now you can just move it to a different table, which is basically backed up by S3, which makes it way simpler to actually execute.
Yep, exactly.
And adopting OrioleDB, if you have an existing project, is it just adding the extension, or will it come with some downtime and migration?
So let's say if you adopted it now, let's say you're running Postgres on your home server, for example. If you adopt it now, it is the case of creating the extension, but it is also based off the fork of Postgres as well. So the changes that are needed in Postgres are currently open, and some have been already merged, some are still pending review. So the idea is from Postgres 17 onwards, then hopefully this will be the case that it's as simple as enabling an extension. But before that, it does mean using the fork.
Where can people learn more about OrioleDB and OrioleDB in Supabase?
So Supabase Launch Week is happening now. So supabase.com/launch week, launch-week is where most of there'll be links to blogs, and there's some Twitter spaces and some Discord chats being held. So the blog announcement as well, is probably the best place to check. To learn more about OrioleDB, the Git repository is pretty good. They have an architecture section as well that outlines the changes pretty well. There's a cool talk. I could also send the link after this, but there's a cool talk from Pacona live maybe a few years ago, where they talk kind of more in depth about the design of Oriole, and then also how it was currently being used at the time, it's pretty in depth. I think it's an hour-long talk. Yeah.
My take on the OrioleDB adaptation. So the upsides, of course, you have a reduced I/O. It's more scalable. You have a higher storage efficiency. You have less load. But you also have a bunch of potential downsides. So it's a completely new storage engine. So it has less extensive real-world testing. And this is very important, especially in Postgres. Postgres is one of the most well-tested databases out there. So OrioleDB could mean potential undiscovered bugs, and also not the same degree of optimizations you probably have as in Postgres, especially for your queries. So it could be a great fit for workloads with many writes, with a need for high scalability, or which are really sensitive to storage cost, or which just at the moment do some data offloading. But at the same time, they might be less optimal for workloads with extremely complex and specialized queries that may not yet be fully optimized in OrioleDB, or which rely on other Postgres extensions which can't be integrated. So OrioleDB wants to be pushed into the main Postgres, but this will probably take some time. So I also do not expect it to be integrated into Supabase directly, but rather be more like an opt-in. And what this means for you, if you want to adopt it, especially locally, you just can install the extension pretty easily. If you want to adopt it to your existing database, you should first test it, and especially you should decide based on your workloads and use case. If you really think your use case requires it, you could try to do a copy of your database and try out OrioleDB on the copy, and then you can assess whether the performance benefit actually outweigh the potential downsides that might happen with OrioleDB. See you next time.